John Danzer, wasn't there. And after a little while, it was like, okay, he wants me to put John Danzer into the story. So it was like, okay, well, you want him there? John was there.
The problem was that Dancer had an alibi. The day of the crime happened to have been his birthday.
My client's alibi was that he was living in Warminster, Pennsylvania at the time, which is right outside of Philadelphia. He was working with an HVAC company the entire day of the murder. He came home, took a shower, went out with friends to celebrate his birthday, and then went back to work the next morning. That was his alibi.
So they brought me back to the police headquarters and said, hey, John Danzer's got an alibi a mile long.
So who said?
That was Robert Clinton Ford. He goes, you lied to us. And he said, you lied to me? That's it. John Danzer didn't do it. John Danzer wasn't there. But guess what? They still prosecuted him. They didn't let him go, even with an airtight alibi. 1 month later, he's at a preliminary hearing to determine whether they have enough evidence to charge him with murder and rape. Forget the truth. Forget justice. Forget the alibi. As far as the Commonwealth of Virginia is concerned, John Danzer was in that apartment. So I had to testify at his preliminary hearing.
Saying?
Saying that he was there.
But then you knew he had an alibi. They knew he had an alibi. They knew that you knew he had an alibi. What were they thinking?
That's the million-dollar question. You would have to ask the Commonwealth what they were thinking.
Detective Ford would not talk to us, despite repeated requests. But in a deposition in 2006, he made the following statement.
What's the truth about what occurred?
That every one of them was guilty. And I still believe that today.
How many people is that?
Every one of them.
Ford had to protect his work. He couldn't come back looking ridiculous. Well, how in the world can one detective take so many confessions? Somebody's going to wake up. Unfortunately, nobody did in this case. The writing was on the wall. Everyone's DNA is coming back negative. Isn't anyone going to wake up here? Where's your prosecutor?
The prosecutor, D.J. Hansen, also refused to give an interview on camera. But in 2001, he appeared on a TV program called Medical Detectives about the case, expressing full confidence in the work of the police.
The police detectives in this case were very professional. It's not their business to obtain confessions at any cost. They're interested in the truth.
In a part of the interview which never aired, Hansen revealed his thoughts about the growing pool of defendants.
When I look back on it, it seemed as though, as frustrating as it was to have this DNA come back, that it was not these guys, one after the other. It was almost as though Michelle was telling us that you don't have everybody yet. And if that was the one thing I take away from this case, that we were able to get as many people as we were, as though she kept telling us that you don't have them all yet, and there's more. And it just so happened that that's the way the case fell, that one after the other, these men at first wouldn't implicate themselves, and eventually some implicated everybody. So we knew that this was a gang rape and murder, without a doubt.
There were now 7.
The prosecution, that includes the police and the prosecutor's office, had a theory of the case. And every time a new person surfaced, they had a different version of what happened. And instead of sitting down saying, you know, there's a problem here with this case. This case is nothing like we've seen before. It's going in 12 different directions. It goes this way, then it goes this way. And the only thing they were concerned about was preserving the people they had already charged, preserving those convictions. They would bend their theory of the case to conform to the new confession, the new physical evidence. Anytime somebody confessed, there were discrepancies, so they would come in and say, well, our theory here was wrong, but we've tweaked it a little bit, so now we're going this way with it. They were simply bending their case to fit whatever evidence came before them.
Dancer's case marked a turning point for Derek. He recanted his confession.
After, 5-6 months of sitting in jail and listening to other inmates talking and talking to my family and my girlfriend at the time, my brain finally kicked back in and rational thought came back in. And I was like, I can't do this. It's against my morals to send an innocent man to jail.
When it got to the trial date, he couldn't do it. And he told me, I can't do this. I cannot throw my friends under the bus.
So about a month later, I signed the paperwork pulling out of the plea agreement. And within a week, Rick Pauley, Jeffrey Ferris, and John Danzer were released because there wasn't enough evidence.
As for Derek himself, he would have to go to trial, where he would now face the death penalty. Then an unexpected turn. A woman gave the police a letter which her daughter-in-law had received from a man in prison. It was an angry love letter. It was also a threatening one. You wanted to know how I really felt about you, and I told you. You never even wrote back. Ain't no forgiving you. You thought you knew me. You don't. Nobody knows me. His name was Omar Abdul Ballard. The letter ended with a stunning admission that he, Ballard, killed Michelle Bosco. You remember that night I went to Mommy's house and the next morning Michelle got killed? Guess who did that? Me. Ha ha. Ballard had been in prison for 2 years after viciously beating a woman in the same apartment complex where Michelle was murdered. He also raped a 14-year-old girl less than a mile away. Both crimes were committed within 3 weeks of Michelle's murder.
Sexual homicides are very rare. In that year, occurred 1997, in the United States, based on FBI statistics, there were 67 rape murders in the United States. That's out of over 15,000 murders, only 67. So someone who is sexually violent is a very unusual sort of crime. So you need to look for any prior similar crimes at all. And here we had this brutal rape and murder. And then 3 weeks later, another brutal rape, but not a murder, a beating. But then we had the beating of a woman just before this, 100 feet from Michelle Bosco's apartment. They ignored that.
Ballard grew up in foster homes in New Jersey, a tough kid in a tough neighborhood. In Norfolk, he joined up with an old friend, Tamika Taylor, that friend of Michelle Moore Bosco at the apartment complex. Ballard's DNA, which had been stored since his arrest a year and a half before, was quickly analyzed. It was a match.
He was in custody shortly after Michelle Moore Bosco was killed. He had these convictions, his DNA was in the databank, and nobody did anything to try to run it through the databank to see if there was a match.
Because if there was a match, the whole case wouldn't have happened.
Their theory would have fallen apart in a big way. But if they had done it and they'd learned of the match much earlier on, then 5 or 6 other people would never have been investigated and would never have been charged.
Ballard confessed almost immediately and said he had acted alone.
I was on cloud 9 because now they've got a DNA match, and he's saying he did it alone. Hey, when somebody's DNA matches, it proves they were there. He's saying he did it alone. I go to trial, I'm going home.
I thought it would be any day now they would let me go, and that I would be able to go home. But my lawyer was ever the realist. And he said, don't expect it. That's not how the system works. You're going to go to trial.
And that's what happened. The state was undeterred. After 2 years of secret interrogations, accusations, and confessions, Eric Wilson would be the first of the accused to go to trial.
I still had some faith in the system, and I believe that since I did not do it, and then when the DNA evidence came back, I knew in my heart that I would not be convicted because I wasn't there and I could prove it.
But by now the prosecution had a new theory involving 8 people. The 4 original sailors, the 3 who had been released, and Omar Ballard, who the prosecution believed was part of what was now a gang rape, in spite of his claim that he'd acted alone.
I remember Mr. Ballard arriving on the scene, and it was a surprising event. And the funny thing was that he said that he acted alone. And of course, the detectives were trying to get him to bring in the other 7. And he said, no, I did it myself.
If they were rational, objective, fair-minded police and prosecutors, they would have let everybody else go. But they couldn't admit what was so obvious. They made a mistake, a big mistake. 4 people had been interrogated coercively, confessed to a crime they didn't commit, and instead of acknowledging that mistake and these individuals' innocence, they tried to link Omar Ballard to these individuals. They tried to make it a group crime.
The new prosecution theory was an even more complicated conspiracy, that by chance, Ballard had met the 7 defendants in the parking lot of the building complex and decided to join them in the crime.
Ballard clearly was directly responsible for this crime. But there was no association between Ballard and the Navy guys, yet they had to weave this preposterous sort of conspiracy theory together where these 7 or 8 Navy guys were in the parking lot trying to get into the apartment, but they couldn't. Well, this goes against the initial theory that Williams went into the apartment because he knew her. Well, but now they couldn't get in. But now Ballard came along, a stranger. They said, hey, we have this great idea. We want to rape and murder this woman in this apartment. Would you help us? And Ballard said, oh, yeah, for sure, no problem. I'll get you in. It's not a problem. And then these 8 guys, or 9 guys, go in the apartment and, according to the state's theory, raped and murdered her.
Ballard appeared at the trial only to plead the 5th. The judge informed the jury that Ballard's DNA matched the semen found in the victim, and that he claimed to have acted alone. The key witness for the prosecution was Joe Dick. Having agreed to cooperate, his testimony had to support the prosecution's newest theory of the 8 perpetrators. Eric Wilson's defense lawyer, Greg McCormick, tried to emphasize the absurdity of this version of events.
All 7 of you went out to the parking lot, correct?
That's correct.
While you and Eric are out there talking, I understand an 8th person comes up?
Yes.
And this 8th person is who?
Ballard. I didn't know him at the time, Your Honor, until I was told of his name.
When Joe Dick testified that the 7 of us guys tried to get into Miss Bosco's apartment, but we couldn't because she didn't know any of us. And we all go outside into the parking lot and meet this total stranger and start talking about a crime that we want to commit. And he goes, oh, well, I can get you in the apartment. And he just joins us. I mean, that's something out of a science fiction book.
You just, you know, if it was on TV, you wouldn't believe it. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, how can you go from these 7 white guys, sailors, to this black guy, sex offender, that don't even know each other, hook up and make a conspiracy to go in and rape and murder this girl? It doesn't make any sense. It's absurd.
Led by the prosecutor, Joe described the crime of 8 men raping and stabbing the victim.
We all rushed in. We grabbed her. Somebody put their hand over her mouth.
How did you grab her?
I grabbed the left leg. Somebody else grabbed the right leg. There were 2 more people on the arms, and somebody had their hand over her mouth.
What did you do?
We all took turns. I'm not sure of the order.
Took turns doing what?
Raping her.
Joe remembers being torn inside by his testimony.
Around the time of Eric's trial, I had started to think or come to the conclusion that, yeah, I was there, I did do this. And that's not a good feeling, thinking that you did something that you never did.
Eric's mother, Ramey, was sitting in the courtroom.
I should have been angry. I should have just been so angry with him because he was up there saying that my son did these horrible things that I knew he didn't do. And instead of being angry at him, I could only feel sorry for him. He was such a sad person, just a shell of a person saying what he had to say to save his life.
He reminded me very much of somebody that had suffered greatly while he was in prison, and he had lost both whatever physical stature, weight, and complexion and looks that he may have had. So when he presented himself almost as a ghost.
Joe's testimony and record of confessions were distressingly graphic and detailed.
After I in Michelle's mouth, Dan and I switched places. I Michelle's for about 5 minutes and then got up and held her wrist down again. Then after we had...
Well, you wonder how these suspects could have come up with these really depraved narratives of sexual assault, rape, and murder. And as I read through them, and particularly the one of, I think it was of Dick, it seemed to me that there was a clue in that they were kind of low-grade male pornographic fantasies, something out of a bad porno movie, particularly the one where 2 of them are having sex with her at the same time, one oral sex and one intercourse. And you said, wait a minute, this sounds like something he's making up out of his own deep phantasms, right? And it obviously bore no relation to the state of the corpse and the DNA evidence and so on.
Eric's lawyer implied that Joe's testimony stemmed from his fear of the death penalty.
Mr. Dick, you would agree you are a liar, correct?
Yes.
You would agree that you have given totally false versions of this event on numerous occasions?
Yes.
You have lied in court, have you not?
Yes.
Because Joseph Dick does not want to die, correct?
Yes, sir.
Eric took the stand in his own defense. He claimed that his confession was false and was extracted by Detective Ford, who was, he said, very aggressive, very threatening, very angry. The prosecutor asked Eric if he would confess to killing someone if it weren't true.
At that point in time, if they had told me that I killed JFK, I would have told them that I handed Oswald the gun.
Both Eric and his lawyer were optimistic.
I honestly and truly felt that I was going to go home that day a free man. Because I didn't do it, I had all my hope and all my faith was put into that one moment. And it was shattered.
It shattered when his audiotaped confession was played in open court to a riveted jury.
Dan, Joe, and Michelle went and sat on this couch. They were just talking a little bit, and Dan grabbed her, put her on the ground, and everyone started wrestling. They asked me to join in. I said, fine.
When confessions are introduced at a trial, what happens is the presumption of innocence goes out the window.
I think that the wrestling moved into the bedroom. I grabbed Michelle by either the shoulders or the upper arm. She was shaking her head left and right. Started saying no.
The confession, even when there's other evidence of innocence, the confession overrides that evidence. People ignore, jurors ignore that evidence.
I looked up and Dan was about to start raping her. And I believe I went in next. I remember specifically her looking up at me afterwards, after I had finished, and asking me to help her. But I didn't know what to do. I was confused.
The jury's verdict was guilty of rape.
My statement is what got me convicted. It felt like someone hit me in the stomach, and it took everything I had not to collapse to my knees right there.
He was sentenced to 8.5 years in prison.
Oh, it was very hard. It was very hard. You wake up with this feeling of devastation every morning, and you go to bed with it every night. It's just so unreal, especially when you have always had faith in the system.
I was 20 years old when I went to the Persian Gulf. I was 29 when I was finally able to walk a free man.
One stop to 65 destinations, including Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. Fly to London Heathrow and Paris, Qantas and Emirates, together connecting the globe.
How can you clean carpets, hard floors, stairs, and anything up high with no loss of suction? Find out at dyson.com.au DC44.
8 months after Eric's verdict, Derek went to his trial.
Dan started to strangle her, keep her from talking, and to kill her. I made the statement, just get a knife and stab her.
He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. His jury, too, couldn't get over the confession. Daniel and Joe decided not to face a jury and took a plea of life without parole. Daniel because he was afraid of the death penalty. Joe because he had come to believe he was guilty. The confessions doomed them all.
Then Dan stabbed her, I stabbed her.
No one doubted that what they were hearing was the absolute truth.
Eric stabbed her, Joe stabbed her, and Rick Pauly also stabbed her.
The one confession no one believed was Omar Ballard's, that he had acted alone.
I alone committed the murders. There was no one with me. No one was ever present in any...
In 2010, Ballard agreed to talk to us by phone from prison where he is serving a life sentence. He said the prosecution didn't want to hear that he had acted alone.
It was made clear from the jump that unless I said somebody else was with me, that it wasn't going to be the truth. The only truth they wanted to hear, I did it with someone else.
He avoided the death penalty by cutting a deal with the prosecution, agreeing to say that he committed the crime with the 4 original sailors.
I'm thinking, damn, this is like a miscarriage of justice, because these people sitting here telling me what they want to hear, but they not clearly wanting to hear the truth.
He also told us that he was not surprised that the men had confessed.
They confessed out of fear. See, one thing about me is I'm not intimidated. So when Ford came to visit me on a number of occasions, I actually could see right through it. I understood why these guys made these statements. They confessed out of fear.
13 years after the murder, he wanted us to know the truth, he said, which he stands by.
The truth is that I alone committed the murders. There was no one with me. No one was ever present in any shape, form, or fashion. No one ever had anything to say or do with the case besides me. That's what I stand by.
By 2001, Daniel, Joe, Eric, and Derek had become known as the Norfolk Four. Their case started to attract national attention. In 2004, 3 major law firms signed on as pro bono advocates. The following spring, they submitted a detailed clemency petition to Virginia Governor Mark Warner, who passed it to his successor, Tim Kaine. Governor Kaine took 3.5 years to reach a decision, which he announced shortly before leaving office.
I'm denying the request because I do not believe that the petitioners have met the burden that they have of demonstrating conclusively that they are innocent of all involvement in this crime.
He would deny a request for full pardon. The confessions, he said, were too overwhelming to ignore.
As I have wrestled with the issue of the more than dozen confessions given in different times in different places to different people, some in custodial and interrogatory situations, but some in letters to third persons, I find, just as I believe the jury and judge found in this case, that it is difficult to completely ignore the entire weight of these confessions. It is difficult.
But in the end, he said, he also had grave doubts about their guilt. So he granted the 3 still in prison conditional pardons.
And a conditional pardon to 3 of the individuals.
Derek, Daniel, and Joe were released the next day, August 10th, 2009. They would be free, but not exonerated. They would be branded felons and sex offenders. If there was anyone who understood what their life would be like, it was Eric. He'd been released 4 years before.
Once you have been convicted of this type of crime, you will be paying for it for the rest of your life. I've not been able to work on some jobs. I've actually been escorted off of one job when they found out.
3 years ago, he met Misty. They got married. They love each other, but they struggle.
We can't move into town because we're worried about what the neighbors will do, what they will say.
Some areas actually require the police to knock door to door and ask every one of your neighbors if it's okay if I move into the area.
Yes. So
you know, and if one neighbor says that it's not okay, you're not allowed to move into that area.
Every year, Eric has to register as a sex offender.
It bothers Eric greatly that he has to go and register. It's an embarrassment every time he has to go. Because somebody sees that designation on a piece of paper, they don't know the story, and so they think he is a predator. And it's terribly embarrassing and very hard for him.
They live in a rundown trailer that belongs to Misty's family. They have almost no friends left.
When they found out that we were even dating, they were very upset. Several of them came to me telling me, "Did you know that he's on the sex offender registry?" And they would not stay friends with me.
They have a 2-year-old child, and Misty has a 7-year-old from a previous relationship, Garrett.
Our oldest, he does not know anything about this, but it's not going to be long, and he's going to start noticing that people look at us different.
I think the hardest thing is Garrett. Eric is the only dad he's ever known, and he constantly asks why he has a different name. And more than anything, Eric wants to adopt him. We actually had tried at one point, but they told us he would have to pass a background check, and he can't. And it broke our hearts.
It has been 9 months since their release. Joe Dick is still wrestling with what happened.
There are times when I wish that I could have gone back and redo that day to where things worked out differently. It's a part of me that I'll never be able to get rid of.
He is on his way to Washington to meet with the appeal lawyers who helped to free the Norfolk Four. It will be their first time together since their arrests. Joe arrives at the meeting first. He had briefly met Derek and Daniel recently, but he hasn't seen Eric since he testified against him at the trial. He is petrified.
Just knowing that I helped put two guys away who never should have been there.
What's up, Joe?
Derek and Daniel try to make it easy for him.
This is a rare deal for me. What's going on?
Morning.
Hey, Aaron, I'm sorry for getting you involved.
Sorry, Michael.
Like we said, they played all of us, you know. And it's water under the bridge, and let's just move forward.
Yep.
You know.
For a long time, I had a hard time with it. But, you know, time heals everything. And eventually you're able to see through everything and realize exactly what was going on. And once you can see the truth of the matter, it makes it a lot easier to move past it. You know, because it wasn't just you that I was mad at. I was mad at a lot of folks. Besides, being mad at someone only hurts yourself.
Yeah, that is true. Ford did it to all of us. You know, he did it to every one of us.
I had done something.
No, I know he did. I know he did. And, you know, it took me years. I mean, I was out before I could think clearly.
Guys, I can't tell you how happy we are to see you.
Seeing you all here together and seeing you out, it is so special to us.
It's a lot better than seeing you in those browns and oranges that we saw you in last year and before.
The lawyers want to update the men on their legal status and the next stages of the fight.
We were as disappointed as you that we only got half a loaf from the pardon process. But as you all know, we're not done. We wanted to talk a little bit about the status of the legal proceedings.
Why don't we start with you, Derek? Your case is the furthest along. We won a state habeas on behalf of Derek, finding that Detective Ford and the Norfolk police committed constitutional violations.
Joe, we're going to be going to court very quickly with your case. The paperwork is nearly done, but we're going to face the same.
So we expect in the next few months to have an oral argument in the Fourth Circuit, and we're confident that at the end of that, finally, this conviction will be.
And Eric, same with you. The hope is, just as with Dan and Joe, that the courts are going to say that evidence is strong enough that we're going to hear your appeal. Because if they hear your appeal, you have a very good chance of getting the second half of the loaf. Getting your
Then some startling news that broke a few days before, back in Norfolk.
You may have read in the papers that Detective Ford was indicted several days ago for abuse of the criminal justice system.
Detective Robert Glenn Ford had been indicted for extorting money from defendants in exchange for getting them favorable treatment. He has pled not guilty.
What we're hoping is that the officials in Virginia will see that they had a serial offender of the law who had the power of the badge. He did it before your case, he did it during your case, and he's done it since.
The only thing that has kept you under these convictions for all these years is what happened in that room with Glenn Ford. And Ford now, the light has finally been
It's not just one detective who's a rogue detective. This case is much more than just that. To understand why this case happened is really an indictment of the police, the prosecutors, to some extent, well, in addition to the police and prosecutors, the lawyers, the defense lawyers, and to some extent the judge and the jury. This case really raises deep questions about the system, not just one actor or two actors in the system.
So they are out, but they are not free. They have moved back to their parents, trying to put their lives together, finding solace mainly at home. Nicole Williams, Daniel's wife, died while he was in prison.
I'm not sure if I'll have a family, because I don't know if there's someone that's going to want to be around me. I have to be registered as a sex offender for the next 25 years.
I basically built myself a new cell, my bedroom. When I'm not at work, when I'm not in the kitchen eating dinner, I'm in my bedroom. Watching TV, sleeping, because that's where I'm safe. So all I did was trade one cell for another. And until my name is cleared, that's how it's going to have to be.
Derek Tice won his petition to have his conviction overturned, but the Attorney General of Virginia has appealed it. The cases for the other three men are still pending. Retired Detective Robert Glenn Ford was found guilty in October 2010 on 2 of 4 extortion charges. He will be sentenced in February 2011.